as you are wont to do, Matthew Coller, before the show, you were doing draft sims because that's all you do when you're not talking into a mic and half the time when you are talking into a mic. And I feel like you were just trolling Judd.
I was not just trolling Judd or Rick Spielman's wife. Yesterday, Rick Spielman mentioned that his wife told him not to come home if he drafts a corner. So I decided in a draft sim that I would draft a corner just to see what it looked like. So here's how this first round turned out. And then I'll tell you about the rest of the draft. The best offensive lineman went off the board before the Vikings.
Okay.
Andre Dillard went to Green Bay in this scenario. Garrett Bradbury went to Washington, and Jonah Williams went to New York. So those are the three guys that I look at as sort of a cut above the rest. That left me with either having to reach for an offensive lineman like Chris Lindstrom or Dalton Reisner. I don't really like Cody Ford's fit in this offense. He projects as a guard, but he's 330 pounds. That does not scream outside zone scheme. So I had my pick of the litter of other positions. And all right, I'm going to go with a cornerback to see how it works. So I picked Greedy Williams with the 18th pick.
And then I pulled Judd off of you.
Yes.
And then you continued
Yeah,
out.
of course you took a cornerback.
Right.
Yeah.
Zolgad's
Thanks, Mike.
head then exploded. But when I looked at the other potential options, he was the best player to take here. I mean, there's a couple wide receivers that I could have taken that people would have liked. Eric McCoy is an offensive lineman that might be a fit. There's an interior defensive lineman from Notre Dame, Jerry Tillery, who would fit that 3 technique spot if you wanted to pick him.
Yep.
If these offensive linemen go before the Vikings, they're just going to have to take the best player. And at this point, Greedy Williams from LSU is the best player, so I took him. And of course, everyone's head would explode. US Bank Stadium is on fire.
Because there's a huge flaw here.
Judd's going to walk out of our draft coverage.
What is the huge flaw?
The huge flaw is this. Until you give me a draft sim that can make trades, you got to trade up. Like, you can't sit there at 18 and just watch this happen.
See, that's the thing, though, is...
So if you see a run on offensive lineman happening and you're Rick Spielman...
You got to go.
You're running up and making a trade.
Absolutely.
But here's the issue with that, is there isn't really a run, so to speak. It's Andre Dillard gets taken, and then Garrett Bradbury goes.
Mm-hmm.
So the guy you're hoping for is Jonah Williams.
Right.
The pick before you is where Jonah Williams goes to the New York Giants at 17.
Okay.
So do you want to spend draft capital to move up one spot or just roll the dice that they don't take Jonah Williams?
No, I'm going up.
Which is what I would probably do. I probably wouldn't trade up. I would rather take my cornerback at 18. Now think about the cornerback position though, guys. As much as everyone cannot stand this idea, let's go through the Minnesota Vikings cornerbacks right now. Xavier Rhodes, the head coach, is talking about how he needs to bounce back. Trey Waynes, contract is up after this year, mostly an average player through his career. Mackenzie Alexander, 1/2 of one good season, contract up after this year. Holton Hill, suspended for the first 4 games. Mike Hughes just started running on a football field yesterday. That's where your cornerbacks are right now.
Are you going to trade Trey Waynes during the course of this draft?
I don't know if they will or not.
Because if you're not going to, you're going to milk him for one last year. This is all about this year now. There's no, I keep saying this, there's no future here.
This does allow you to trade him if you want.
Spielman and Zimmer, if they are going to keep their jobs, are playing for one season.
So here's my thought on this subject about drafting for the next year. If you don't have a top 10 pick, don't bother because you're probably going to make a mistake. If you decide to reach way up on an offensive lineman as opposed to taking a cornerback from LSU who was completely dominant, is 6'1", runs a 4.37, perfect for Mike Zimmer.
Right.
Just if you're going to pass on that level of talent to reach up on an offensive lineman that you could probably get similar caliber in the second round, you're making a desperate mistake. And in general, unless you have a top 10 pick, those guys do not have a massive year one impact on their team. So even whatever you've done in free agency now, like this is your team. And the guys that you put on it, think about the recent draft picks of the Vikings. Year one, how much impact have they had? Mike Hughes gets injured. Dalvin Cook gets injured. Pat Elflein made an impact. He was a 3rd round pick. Laquan Treadwell, no impact.
Anthony Barr did.
Anthony Barr did.
At 9, I believe.
Why? Because he's a top 10
But that's
pick.
what I'm saying. You got to go up. You have to go up. This conversation, these sims have to involve me getting up as high as I need to go to get what I need here.
I would consider what Judd is saying and moving up. If you see an offensive lineman who you deem worthy of moving up for and giving up whatever assets, you have to do that. But I would consider maybe going the other way. And if the scenario plays out that Coller just described, where all the offensive linemen with 1st round grades are off the board before it gets to you, but you still see offensive linemen with second round grades who you think will be there when your next pick comes around, or maybe you can trade for a pick early in the second round and move down a little bit. There'll still be guys there who are worthy of the picks that you're moving into, who may fit your scheme. If that's the scenario that's in front of you, then trade down, get more picks, get more cracks at it, and more offensive linemen. And yes, you can take a corner in a later round, because you have a valid point when you talk about their depth at the cornerback position right now, with the injury to the first round pick last year, with Holton Hill being suspended the first 4 games, and their depth moving forward for years to come because of the contract situations that you described. So I see where you're going and why you would take a cornerback there, but I would go the route Judd is talking about, which is move up if you see an offensive lineman you really like, or move down where you think there will still be offensive linemen who you like, who fit your scheme, and more draft picks and more cracks at it.
So let's look at both of these potential scenarios, the move up or move down. There's one guy that I would say you move up for, and he's not an offensive lineman, even though I know that they desperately, desperately need offensive linemen. So you couldn't trade a second round pick if you were going to move up. That makes it really hard, but maybe you're trading a future pick. The one guy I would do it for is TJ Hawkinson, the tight end from Iowa. It's not only that he was really, really good at Iowa and projects as an all around player, but he's one of those guys where you say, even if he isn't as good as you think he is, he's going to be good. He's just got an all-around skill set. He's a blocker. He's a good route runner. He's a physical player. He's got incredibly good hands. You could throw it anywhere and he'll catch it. That guy would be a game changer for this offense. In my latest draft sim, I took the one that I wasn't trolling with a corner. I took Noah Fant, who's kind of a high ceiling type of guy, but could bust. With Hawkinson, he's got a really high hit rate, and I think he's going to be a top 10 pick. I would do it for him. The offensive lineman, I wouldn't, because I think that there's a number of very good offensive linemen, and a lot of them could step in day one. So when I drafted Greedy Williams, I went then into the second round looking for my offensive lineman, and Elton Jenkins and Chris Lindstrom were both there. Those are 2 interior offensive linemen who could start right away and would fit the system.
What's your preparation if we have a similar situation to 2018 where there starts to be a run? Because what Rick could have done last year was second round, you got to go up again.
Yeah.
And people were, I want there was a level of non-preparation last year that frustrated me. They didn't allow for something to happen that shouldn't have surprised them. So where are you at as far as if that happens?
Well, it's a very interesting scenario because you could see it playing out. It's very clear, I think, the line of where the first round offensive linemen are and where we get into those second round talents, or at least the way that everyone has it falling. I mean, things can always change. Mel Kiper has a few guys on his board that are a little different from everybody else. He has Lindstrom as his 15th best prospect. Most people have him as a second round pick. So you never know entirely. But someone like Dalton Reisner is a good example. I think he would be a phenomenal fit for the Vikings. He ran zone scheme. He played multiple positions. So if he comes in and plays guard, but someone gets hurt at tackle, you can move him to tackle. He's played center before. This guy, I think, is a perfect fit. But most of the draft simulations have him going 6 to 10 picks above where the Vikings are. If you saw all the first round talents go off the board in that first round, and maybe even a stretch on somebody else, and Reisner was your only guy left, that's when you get to that scenario. If you're seeing everyone go off and he's your only guy left who's a first or second round talent, a day one starter talent, that's where you decide to trade up. And with last year, they must have seen Brian O'Neill, and I'm not sure that they were wrong about this. They must have seen Brian O'Neill as kind of the last guy of like second round, first round talents. So that's why they decided not to trade up. And in hindsight, it might end up working out really well for them if Brian O'Neill takes a next step forward because he has a high ceiling. But that's the way I look at it is if there are guys like Jenkins and Lindstrom off the board in the second round and they do something else in the first, if everybody else is gone and there's one guy left with a second round grade, that's where you have to move up.